So first and foremost, you guys have probably seen this before, but people ask me all the time, what's the biggest change in Zen, the architecture behind Ryzen? And the biggest change is that for every 1 hertz of clock speed, we can do 50% more work than our last generation of CPU. So that's really what IPC means, instructions per cycle. It's a measurement of work. How much can we do for every 1 hertz of clock speed? 52% more, and in some cases up to 72% more, depending on what workload you're running. So a massive improvement in the amount of information, the amount of data you can push through the core architecture or the core engine. In terms of performance, obviously they're on sale worldwide at those price points, and I believe these are, yes, these are Cinebench numbers. So just looking at the multi-threaded performance, workloads getting more multi-threaded all the time. Vulkan, DirectX 12, even DirectX 11 games are becoming increasingly multi-threaded, 6, 7 cores, not a big deal. Multitasking, most people are playing a game, streaming to Twitch, browsing the internet, doing multiple things at once, and having more cores and threads available to you makes a big difference. I'll skip that slide, I should have deleted that. Now, Ryzen 5 is what we just launched, and I'm personally most excited about that one. I think the 1600 and 1600X are monster processors, 6 cores, 12 threads, 65 watts or 95 watts, at prices that are basically half or a third of what our competition would charge for the similar level of capability. And that money you save can be invested back into a graphics card, or a better motherboard, or more RAM, or a better monitor, or any number of things that it requires to build a high-performance PC. And we really wanted to reshape the market with Ryzen, so it's not just about offering the same thing as the other guy at the same prices. Value is important, of course. Everybody wants to feel like they got a good amount of performance for their money, regardless of how much they spend. Nobody wants to feel cheated or sold short. So value is important to us, getting the right performance at the right price. But cores and threads, you'll hear that a lot from me. That's also really important to us because I think the industry has sort of settled on 4 cores and 8 threads, or even 2 cores and 4 threads as the standard. And it's unfortunate because that leaves a lot on the table. If you're looking at these games that are increasingly using more cores and threads, or even just the daily usage of someone who's playing a game and browsing the internet, or playing a game and watching a video, or playing a game and streaming to Twitch. All of these things take compute power. They take processor power. And when you are running on a dual-core 4-thread or 4-core 8-thread CPU, trying to do all these other things, that's performance being subtracted from your game, where you want performance the most. So having these peripheral cores on standby with our 6 and 8-core parts makes a huge difference in the smoothness of the game. In fact, if you go look at testing, you'll see oftentimes that Ryzen has better minimum frame rates than the competition, especially as you load up the system with other work. And that's going to give you a smoother gaming experience overall. Prosumer. Prosumer is important to us. No, I skipped that slide by mistake. Prosumer is really important to us. So if you look at the market today, if you read any of the digests that are out there from analyst firms or from journalists, they often say there's a workstation market and a gaming market. They act like nobody who does gaming would also do video work or 3D modeling work or anything like that. And people who do the 3D modeling and video work, well, they just don't play games. Well, we know that's bogus. We know people do this all the time. Everybody has a hobby. And a lot of people like to fire up Photoshop or 3ds Max or Maya or Blender or Handbrake or Sony Vegas. Whatever it is that you like to do, people are doing that at home or professionally. And it's great to have a solution that can capably switch between those 2 worlds. So you have the high instructions per cycle and the high clock speeds necessary for gaming, but you also have that parallelism that's very useful for these what we call prosumer tasks. And those are the people who are PC enthusiasts and who play more than just games, or who do more than just gaming on their PC. And that market is growing all the time. It's a hard market to measure. Not a lot of people are looking at it, but we are 100% convinced that There's a large untapped market out there for people who need more than 4 cores for exactly this reason. Our gaming performance is looking really great. Depending on the tests, -5 to +10 to 15%, depending on what suite of games you look at, especially in the Ryzen 5 segment. And this is against the 7600K, which is our competition's best-selling processor of all time. We, frankly, collaborate in a ton of games and have headroom to spare. And you'll find that that's true across most of the benchmarks that you look at, even 1080p gaming benchmarks. So this is a really important product for us in the market. The 1600X versus the 7600K, that is the meat and potatoes of the PC industry. It is really fun to talk about the $500 CPUs and the $500 GPUs and the $300 motherboards and whatnot, but this segment right here is what people buy more often than anything else. And it's important to keep that in mind. It's important for me to keep that in mind because I love to play with the latest and greatest hardware that AMD has, the most powerful GPUs, but I always have to think about these people because they outnumber me 4 to 1, 5 to 1. And so it's really nice that we have a very competitive, powerful solution in that space. If you haven't heard of SenseMI technology before, quick show of hands, anybody not heard of this? Okay, good. We actually have artificial intelligence in Ryzen. It's a consumer CPU, so it's primitive artificial intelligence, but it is an actual neural network, a synthetic neural network inside the chip. And we do a couple things with that. First, we have this thing called pure power. At any given point in time, the CPU is monitoring sort of this triangle of current temperature on top, distance to our TDP, like 95 watts or 65 watt TDP, and how much power is being pulled from the CPU socket. So we look at that triangle. The CPU is constantly monitoring this, and if the operating condition of the chip is anywhere inside that triangle, we can continue to raise clock speeds. That also gives it the opportunity to, in reverse, lower voltages all the way down to 0.2 volts if the CPU is not doing anything intense. In fact, the chip is actually capable of inspecting its own silicon and dialing in the exact voltages for every single frequency the processor can select. So before Ryzen, every CPU would come from the factory with a pre-programmed table of voltages versus frequencies. We pre-program a curve, and it can operate anywhere on that curve with clock speed on the bottom, voltage on the side, and then the CPU can dial in maybe even a slightly better curve over time as it runs. So that's how the CPU uses the intelligence to be more efficient with pure power. Precision boost. Past processors might go into boost or turbo mode in 100 megahertz jumps. And let's say you had a workload that couldn't quite make 3.9 gigahertz for whatever reason. Maybe it draws a ton of power, maybe it's thermally constrained, but let's say it just can't make 3.9. Well, on an older CPU, the CPU would have no choice but to drop to 3.8 gigahertz, 100 megahertz, right off the top. With Precision Boost, we can actually alter our clock speed in 25 megahertz jumps. So let's say 3.85 is the magic number. That's the magic clock speed. Well, Ryzen will be able to go to 3.85 gigahertz instead of dropping all the way to 3.8, all the way to 3.7. So it allows us to get closer to the perfect frequency for any given workload. And we can do that in under a millisecond. Extended frequency range. This is something we started exploring on Ryzen. If you have that triangle of temperature, power, and TDP, the one angle that a user can control is temperature. Put a better heatsink on it. Put better fans in your case. So if the triangle is this big and you stretch up the temperature angle, the CPU has essentially a larger triangle to play with. It has more headroom, more opportunity to explore other clock speeds. And with that, we can allow the CPU to reach clock speeds that it would not ordinarily hit under our sort of manufacturer recommended worst case conditions. We have to assume that a CPU is going to be running in say, a house or a case that's 50 degrees Celsius, which is quite warm, or even 60 degrees Celsius. We have to assume that the user is only ever going to have one fan in the case. We have to assume that the user will only ever put the smallest possible heatsink on the chip. And we have to design around those assumptions to ensure that the full range of what consumers might do with our chip is accounted for. But if there's an enthusiast who puts better cooling on it, then they're very far away from our worst case scenario. And that allows us to give more clock speed headroom back to the user. It allows the CPU to go faster than it would otherwise be designed to do. So on most of our parts, it's about 100 megahertz, and some of the mid-range parts, like the Ryzen 5, I believe 1500, that's 200 extra megahertz on top for having a better cooling solution. And this is something that will continue to develop as time goes on, but we think it's really cool that that intelligence in our chip can be used to give something to users automatically, that this awareness of the environment can turn into something useful for the consumer. That is the artificial neural network inside the chip. We use a system called hashed perceptrons, which is another way of saying the human brain is made up of neurons. We've recreated those neurons in silicon. Those are called perceptrons, and we've networked them together. And so this system right here is responsible for learning and understanding how the applications you're running actually use the CPU. Programming languages are predictable because humans design them, and humans love patterns. And that means the CPU can learn the patterns of the programming language. Once we learn the patterns, we can take shortcuts. We know where the app is going. And with those shortcuts, we can make things a little faster. In fact, if you run the same benchmark a couple times in a row, you'll find that the benchmark gets just a little bit faster. And that's the chip learning what the application is requesting or going to request in the future. The CPU is actually predicting into the future what the app is going to do. And then the last one, smart prefetch. So if this is responsible for predicting what an app is going to do, this one is responsible for bringing the correct data into the chip ahead of time too. And I don't mean like a sound file or a character file or something like that. I mean the code that you write for an app, that is also data. And that data has to be inside the CPU to work on it. The other thing we wanted to work on is the experience of buying a Ryzen processor. I think people are accustomed to buying a CPU with this mediocre cooler packaged in the box that everybody just throws away and buys something else. And last year we thought to ourselves, what if we packaged a cooler that was worth keeping? And that was called Wraith, and we launched that on the AMD FX, and it was tremendously popular. And so we came back and designed a new series of Wraith coolers that come on the 1700, 1600, 1500X, and 1400. And they go smaller and smaller as the clock speeds go down and the power requirements of the chip go down. But in my estimation, these are every bit as good as a $25, $35 cooler that you would buy aftermarket. If you think of a product like the Cooler Master Hyper 212, extremely popular, really best-selling on Newegg or Amazon. That cooler right there is about as good as the Cooler Master Hyper 212, right? So that's more money we put back in the user's pocket. It's very easy to get to 4.1 gigahertz on this CPU on that cooler, even at elevated voltages and a modestly cooled chassis. So we are unlocking overclocking across all of our platforms and giving you the cooler to do it as well. And that's something our competition is not. AM4 platform is, of course, the new name. It's the name of the CPU socket, but also the name of the chipsets that go along with Ryzen. AM4 is 1,334 pins. I'm sorry, 1,331 pins. So close to that magic number. Comes with PCI Gen 3, USB 3.1 Gen 2 natively. Most interesting thing is that it's actually compatible with 3 different processors. The socket AM4 will support Ryzen, but also the 7th generation APUs when they come to market this year. And in the second half of the year, product code named Raven Ridge, which is our next generation APU. So one socket is going to support every desktop processor we sell from low to high. So you could buy an inexpensive Ryzen motherboard, an AM4 motherboard today with an inexpensive CPU, and over time add more powerful processors to it, add more RAM, add more GPUs, and get more out of that platform. You wouldn't have to switch sockets, pay more money to change your motherboard, stuff like that. We would really like this CPU socket to last until 2020. That is our goal anyway. We know users are tired of switching sockets all the time with the other guy, and we know it's expensive, so we're going to try to keep the socket around as long as possible. There are some things that could change directions on that. If, for example, DDR5 or PCI Express Gen 4 came out and were big and popular, you have to add pins on the bottom of the CPU to support those technologies, so that would require a socket change. But unless that happens, and currently we don't believe that it will, this socket will be around for several years. So that's a long-term investment in the platform that'll last you a while. Kind of a matrix of what we support. Overclocking is enabled on X300, B350, and X370. X370 is our highest end chipset designed for dual GPU. You'll find those motherboards typically have the most number of power phases, good for overclocking, the most number of BIOS options, good for overclocking. And then B350 is more mainstream, somewhere between 75 to 125 US dollars. Those are designed for one GPU. So if you only want one GPU in your system, the B350 is an excellent choice for you. You can save money. And again, put that into a graphics card or a monitor or something. And that will give you a better performing system overall, and you're not going to miss out on much in the overclocking or feature department. A lot of the B350 motherboards we're seeing today are extremely robust in terms of feature set. So those are nice. And then X300 is an interesting one. There are no motherboards in the market with that yet, but it's a chipset the size of my pinky fingernail. It's just that big. Most are about this big, but X300 is very, very tiny. And that's because the Ryzen CPU is actually a system on chip, or an SoC, which means it has SATA and PCI Express and USB all built into the processor. So if you're building a very small form factor motherboard, an ITX form factor motherboard, for example, more often than not, what's included inside Ryzen is enough to give you all the ports you would need on an ITX motherboard. So why do you also need a chipset like B350 or X370 that adds more ports that you won't use? So make it smaller. Take out all the I/O, take out all the extra USB and PCI Express that B350 and X370 provide, distill that chip down to its most essential pieces, and it's just that big. And that does two things. Frees up space on the motherboard, which is good. You can put down another NVMe card or make room on your motherboard for a wireless LAN card, whatever the motherboard vendor wants to do. But also, it frees up 4 additional PCI Express lanes. So by default, B350 and X370 have 16 lanes for graphics and 4 lanes for an NVMe SSD. If you have an X300 board, you get 4 more PCI Express lanes. And that will allow you to build into the motherboard a network card, gigabit Ethernet, or wireless LAN, or an audio card or something without taking lanes away from something else. And then the A320 is sort of our entry-level $50 to $75 motherboard price point. Overclocking is not enabled on A320. That is for your bare bones, everyday sort of system. And the A300 is very similar to the A320, but also that pinky fingernail size chip designed to be very small for everyday compact systems. B350 and X370 and X300 are available for overclocking. Every single motherboard you touch with those chipsets are overclocking enabled and designed to support overclocking for both memory memory clock speed, memory voltage, CPU voltage, and CPU clock speed. It's very important that people be able to overclock their chip. So we just enabled it up and down our entire range rather than specific processors. I know people have had questions when Ryzen 7 came out. I know people are saying, what about your 1080p gaming performance, Robert? We've been working really hard on that. We've got a couple big things in the pipe. First, working with game developers has been a big thing. Ashes of the Singularity, we picked up 30% additional performance on Ryzen through an application patch. In Dota 2, we increased our minimum frame rates by 10%, and in Total War Warhammer, about 10 to 15% performance increase. So it was clear that there were games in the market that were not taking advantage of Ryzen correctly, and we have worked very, very aggressively with game developers to get our own game developers at AMD in touch with those studios to get application patches out the door to improve the performance on Ryzen. As of today, actually yesterday, legitreviews.com posted a review of the 1700X versus the 7700K. We were tied 1-to-1. Even though on paper, we have 500 or 600 megahertz less clock speed, and this is at 1080p on GeForce GTX 1080. Right? So that is a really good testament to how far we've come, that we've been able to go neck and neck with our competition, even with less clock speed. That's a huge achievement for us. We're very proud of that, and the performance today with the updates that we've been making are excellent. In fact, all of the updates we have been making have been published on the AMD blog. Every couple weeks or so, we publish a new community update, which provides details on what we've been doing in the hardware ecosystem, software ecosystem, with game devs, with our partners like MSI, to improve the experience of Ryzen. And to date, we've done, I think, 11 different major updates for AMD Ryzen customers that have improved stability, performance, compatibility, stuff like that. So transparency is important to us, and addressing 1080p gaming performance is important to us and ongoing. So to put a kind of a fine point on that, here are the performance results before and after the application patches that I talked about. You can always see the pre-update in gray and then the post-update in orange. And so these are major performance uplifts.
1600X?
Yeah, 1500X. Also, these are similar results for the 1800X as well, although the numbers are a little higher. So this is an across-the-board advantage for Ryzen that we've been able to pick up by working with game devs. In terms of platform development, Ryzen is an all-new platform, new motherboards, new chipsets, new CPU, new architecture, new everything. And with that comes growing pains. Now, we, I think, have moved very quickly into a position where we feel very great about what the Ryzen ecosystem can do. When we launched Ryzen, DDR4 2400 was the standard. It was a stretch goal to get DDR4 2667 working. And now it's more or less effortless to get DDR4 3200 working just by pressing the button in the BIOS. And that is from the work of our BIOS engineers and the great partnership with motherboard vendors like MSI. They have done excellent work in their firmware for their motherboards to get this high-speed RAM running. HPET is a timer in Windows 10. It's sort of a timer that keeps different parts of the system synchronized, and it's extremely frequent timer. And the frequency of that timing or of the measurement can actually reduce gaming performance. So we engineered some platform fixes that allow users to disable HPET and use an alternative timer called TSC. And long story short, more gaming performance. And then this is a big one. When we got out into the field, we found that the power plan in Windows, how it uses the CPU, how it uses the GPU, was not quite right for Ryzen. By default, Windows 10 comes out of the box with a plan called Balanced. And the Balanced power plan is somewhat conservative about how quickly it increases clock speeds of your CPU. And it's also very aggressive in how quickly it puts CPU cores into an idle state called park. So that's called core parking. And there is a time delay, a performance penalty for taking a CPU out of the parked state. And so this Ryzen balanced power plan is now available in our chipset drivers. Anybody can go download the AMD chipset drivers. This plan will automatically be installed and configured. And it makes Ryzen more aggressive about increasing clock speed when you're in a game. And it disables that core parking, which can dramatically improve the performance of 1080p gaming, especially. So these three things together can produce performance jumps of up to 25% in 1080p gameplay. And those are three of the major activities we've undertaken to improve Ryzen's performance in 45 days or less for our customers. And again, we feel really good about where we are. Counter-Strike, showing you an example of how far we've come with an actual game. This was Ryzen 7 performance, 1800X, on the day that we launched. Slightly under 300 frames per second. You turn off HPET, now you're over 300. You turn on the Ryzen balanced power plan, closer to 350, and 3200. Now you're at nearly 360 frames per second. So you can see, just three simple changes netted us a massive improvement in a really popular game that these users, any CSGO players in the audience, big CSGO players? No? A little bit? Frame rates are king in this game. 144 is not enough, 200 is not enough. Like there's almost no amount of frame rates that a CSGO player can reach that is enough for them. They love frame rates. So it's generally considered 350-ish to be the ideal target, and we're spot on with Ryzen. And we weren't there at launch, to be perfectly honest. We were not there at launch. But our work got us there. So part of what we wanted to do when we built Ryzen was to transform the market. For years, we've been hearing people say CPU prices haven't changed much, or clock speeds haven't changed much, or performance hasn't changed much, or why can I only buy one or two CPUs that overclock? There's lots of stuff that we're hearing about the state of the PC market that people were unhappy about. And we hear that from Reddit, from overclock.net, we hear it on Twitter, we hear it on Facebook, and we kind of built that into a list of all the things that we could do better or differently for the market. And that became Ryzen. We had to get our core performance up. We had to improve our power efficiency. We had to improve the flexibility of our platform. We had to keep a long-lived platform because people love that about FX. And then on top, we put in unlimited overclocking potential. We put in all these platform updates. We put in aggressive work with game developers, and we think it's a fabulous recipe. One reviewer the other day said, if you're buying anything between a Pentium G and an overclocked 7700K, there's basically no reason to buy anything but Ryzen. I feel really great about that, because that means my portfolio from start to finish should be the choice for gamers out there today. Pair it with any GPU that you want, your choice. But from where I sit, Ryzen is an excellent, excellent companion for anybody who wants to do anything more than just gaming.
And another thing, you mentioned about working with the developers earlier, and obviously you announced a partnership with Bethesda. Mm-hmm. And I was just wondering if you could elaborate at all about that relationship. Like, are you aiming to improve performance just on CPUs, or is that going to be a more graphics cards related thing? Just anything else you could elaborate on that deal?
Actually, what a game development partnership really allows you to do is access. That's the key. Having the ability to get your game developers, which AMD has on staff, in the same building as their game developers, getting them to talk to one another. And that's actually beneficial in two ways. It's beneficial for us because we learn a little bit more every time about how game developers are designing their applications, what exactly they're trying to do with the code. And in reverse, we can gives us the power to say, don't do it like that, try this, and you'll get more performance. And those are tricks that they might not always know about. You can't expect a developer to know every architecture permutation in every CPU or graphics card. So that access is true for both CPU and GPU.
Right.
It allows us to optimize an engine and a game for both graphics and processor.
There are some users out there who want to see really high-end single-core performance. Is that something you'd be interested in looking at in further products or something? Because it's still a niche element there that some people really need. Is that something you'd like to sort of
Single-threaded IPC is always important. That's what makes it all go, right? And it doesn't matter if you have many cores or few cores or notebook or high-end. And going back to our Ryzen Tech Day, we placed on our roadmap Zen 2 and Zen 3. Right? Can't say a whole lot about any of those, but improving single-thread performance is always a focus of ours going forward. That's the way you make it happen. Now, I will say that in terms of our single-thread performance, we're top 3 in the market. In history, we're top 3. So we're pretty happy with where we sit right now, but there's always more work to do.
Exports. MSI said there's some maybe coming. Do you have any idea when some X300 ITX boards will actually be in the market?
Good question. It's important to point out, I think, at this point that any of our chipsets are appropriate for ITX. You can build an ITX X370, V350, X300. X300 is really only necessary if the motherboard vendor needs that space on the motherboard back for something else, be it a LAN card or just anything else. Otherwise, if not, B350 is fine, and X370 is fine. I can say that ITX is not too far away. That's all I can say.
Okay.
I know it's important to people, myself included. So setting high-speed memory on this motherboard was really, really simple. These DIMMs have XMP profile built in to run at DDR4 3200. So on this motherboard, all I had to do was go to the AXMP setting and activate Profile 2. Profile 2 sets all the appropriate knobs and levers for getting high-speed RAM working, and it just works. Profile 1 was DDR4 2933. Now, if you didn't have a module that offered XMP, or for whatever reason that did not work, you would select your memory speed manually on the motherboard by setting first to auto, by disabling XMP first, and then setting your DRAM frequency, so we'll try 3200, and then you would go to the advanced DRAM configuration and you can plug in. If you pick up a stick of RAM, it has numbers on it like 16, 16, 16, 36, or whatever. All that's telling you is 16, 16, 16, 16, 36. You just go down the list. So from left to right on the memory module, top to bottom on the BIOS, you just plug those numbers in. That's it. That's how you do it. That's how you overclock RAM. It's really simple. And you may also want to change your DRAM voltage. Most high-speed DIMMs run at 3.5 volts today, but going all the way up to 1.5 volts, it's not going to be a big issue. You can get a lot of extra clock speed and stability, especially if you encounter some memory modules that just, for whatever reason, don't work quite right on Ryzen. We know there are a few of those, and we're working with those memory vendors. So taking your DRAM voltage up to 1.4 or 1.5 can really help stabilize memory overclocks. There is another entry here called Proc ODT. Proc ODT is processor on die termination. And when you have a stick of memory and a signal from the CPU goes out and into the stick of memory, that voltage, that signal has to go somewhere. It doesn't just disappear. It's energy, right? It's an electrical signal. So the on-die termination is a value that determines whether or not, or when, that signal should be canceled out. And if you want the signal to be a 0, a binary 0, and the memory or the CPU thinks it's a binary 1 because this value is set wrong, then you're going to have memory corruption. So Proc ODT, tons of options, but generally you want to try something between the range of 40 and 60 ohms on this motherboard. Other motherboards have this feature too, but this also can help stabilize very high-speed memory overclocking. So if you have a stick of memory that's just fussy, or you're trying to run four 8-gig sticks or something like that at very high speed, somewhere between 40 and 60 ohms on Proc ODT, and not more than 80. Do not go higher than 80. That can be a great way to stabilize your motherboard. Now, if you go higher than 80, you better have liquid nitrogen. So that's an option here. What else? Let's see. So now, in terms of voltages, core voltage, that's obvious. That is the voltage going to the processor cores themselves, the Zen cores. And so, I wish I had a whiteboard. In Zen, in the Zen architecture, you've got the CPU cores.
There's one here.
No, yeah. Oh, I'll use this one over here. You've got the core itself. You've got the CPU core itself, but then there's all this stuff around the CPU core. That's called the uncore, or the SoC. The uncore includes things like PCI Express bus, memory controllers, USB, SATA. So when you're adjusting the vCore, all you're doing is adjusting the voltage of the CPU cores themselves. There is a separate voltage setting, often called SoC voltage, that affects the voltage for this, the uncore part. And by raising uncore to 1.1 volt, it's a huge improvement in the stability of a high-speed memory overclock. So if you've got DIMMs that, for whatever reason, just don't work automatically for you at high clock speed, setting to 1.1 on the uncore can be hugely beneficial. All right, back over here. What else? There are some voltages you can generally ignore. The CPU NB voltage, that's the CPU North Bridge voltage. That's the chipset voltage. X370, B350. There's almost no overclocking you would do that would ever require you to change the voltage on the North Bridge. DRAM, covered that. VPP, hold on, I had to look that one up because I never get it right. Okay, this one is somewhat taxing to explain. Memory, the actual contents of what gets stored in memory is stored in a matrix of rows and columns. And when you want to access memory, when a little electrical signal goes out, finds the correct column, goes down, finds the correct row, goes over. And when those two electrical signals meet, that's your storage. That's the item from memory that you want. Now, if you want to change the contents of memory, there's this little single transistor that is sitting next to each cell. Think of Microsoft Excel, right? You've got rows and columns with cells in them. If you have data in each cell, there's a little transistor that sits next to each one, and applying voltage to that transistor is what actually moves data in and out of RAM. So if you are, again, trying to push a high memory overclock, it is very possible that the signals for switching information in and out of memory are getting confused, or getting corrupted by the clock speed. So raising the VPP voltage a little bit can help you. On this motherboard, there are separate, call them termination voltages. A termination voltage is voltage going into the memory, job is done, kill the voltage. That's what VREF is. And you can set a separate one for memory channel A, memory channel B. Typically, this is 1/2 of your DRAM voltage, but you can raise it a little to get more stability. 0.9 volts is typically about the most you want to do. What else do we have here? There are some other voltages that you might find. VDDP on some motherboards. VDDP is also related to memory stability, also related to moving data in and out of memory. That can help, but some basic guidance is as follows. 1, take your SoC voltage to 1.1 volts. That's the first thing you should do for stability reasons. Secondly, if you're going to overclock your CPU, try not to go higher than 1.425 volts. You are risking the long-term lifetime of your processor by going higher than that. When you overclock Ryzen, you are overclocking all the CPU cores unless you turn some of them off, which you can do on some motherboards. So average clock speeds are going to be in the range of 3.8 to 4.1 gigahertz. And that can be a significant performance boost. For example, the 1800X is 3.6 to 4.0. The 4.0 is typically only on 2 cores. So if you're using all the CPU cores simultaneously, it boosts up to 3.7. So if you got the chip to 4.1, now every core is running 400 megahertz faster than it would ordinarily run. That could be, again, a big performance boost for you. Right now, DDR4 3200 is more or less the limit unless you have a motherboard that can adjust what we call the ref clock. All AMD Ryzen motherboards have this master clock speed called the ref clock. It's 100 megahertz. And every clock speed in the system is based off that 100. So if I want to set 4 gigahertz, it's 100 times 40. That's the CPU speed. If I want DDR4 3200, it's 32 times 100, 3200. So the ref clock on some motherboards can be adjusted, and that can help you hit a higher DRAM speed, 3600, 3800 might be possible, depends on your DIMMs. So if you see a phrase called ref clock or REF-CLK, that's that master clock speed you can adjust on Ryzen. What else? There are also some really, really nice features in this motherboard, particularly. MSI has done a really nice job with this BIOS. The memory retry count is an interesting option on this board. By default, Ryzen will test a certain memory speed 3 to 5 times, and then if it can't do it for whatever reason, either the voltage is not right or the clock speed is just too high, the system will automatically fall back to safe settings and then reboot for you, rather than having to get inside your computer and reset the CMOS or something like that. It's an automatic reset. But on some very high overclocks, it might be possible after the 7th or 8th attempt to hit that clock speed. So on this motherboard, you can actually change the number of attempts the CPU will make before automatically resetting. And this is the first time I've seen this on a motherboard. It's a really, really clever feature for overclocking. What else do we have? These can be good. So over voltage protection, probably a good idea. Remember how I said don't go higher than 1.425? It would be a good idea to enable overvolt protection on this board, or any board that offers it if you're trying to overclock. It can save your processor or your motherboard if something goes wrong. Great thing to do. There's also this interesting feature called load line calibration. Let's say I set a CPU core voltage of 1.4 volts. Well, electrical systems aren't perfect, and sometimes the voltage that I ask for can dip slightly. Maybe get 1.39, 1.38. That might be just enough drop to make things unstable. We call that V-droop, or voltage drooping. And by setting the load line calibration to a higher value, you can actually force the voltage controllers to pull the voltage back up to the correct value and maybe stabilize an overclock. So some motherboards will also label this as LLC, load line calibration. Overcurrent protection is another valuable one. All AMD Ryzen motherboards deliver up to 128.8 watts of power, electrical power, from the CPU socket. Exceeding that value if the board is not designed for it, can be dangerous for your motherboard's life. So setting OCP, overcurrent protection, to enable will enforce that value is never exceeded. And that can be great to protect the life of your motherboard when you are undertaking aggressive overclocking. Any questions so far? Okay. Basic steps that I would do as a user. Let's say I bought DDR4 3200, wanted to overclock my processor. I would come into the BIOS here, and first thing I would try is enable the AXMP feature. Let the motherboard set the memory for me automatically. It will also set the voltage for the memory automatically as well. And if that didn't work, I would go in and program those things myself based on the specs in the box. I would try 1.35 volts, plug in the timings myself. Remember going left to right, top to bottom. And then if that didn't work, I'd increase the memory voltage a little bit, bring up the memory timings a little bit, and eventually it would stabilize. The proc ODT setting, again, can be useful here. And then I would move to the CPU side. Automatically, the first thing I would do, set the SoC voltage to 1.1 volts, bring that V core up to 1.4 volts, and then try for 4 gigahertz, so 40x multiplier. And then I would try to stabilize somewhere around 1.35 to 1.4 volts at 4 gigahertz or 3.9 gigahertz. And you'll just want to play with the combinations in that range to see what stabilizes for you. The CPU at my desk over in the next building does 4 gigahertz at 1.325. It's an excellent chip. The one I have at home requires 1.4. That's just the way it goes. But it was, after a little bit of fiddling, it was fairly easy to get both my CPUs to 4 gig all the time on all cores, which is a 10 to 15% overclock on those CPUs based on their default conditions. If you had a Ryzen 5 or something like that, that could be a 20-25% overclock. It would be a massive performance boost for you. And throwing in the DDR4 3200 on top of that would be another massive performance boost. And again, we make all of that available on virtually any AMD motherboard you could possibly buy. So that's it. Overclocking Ryzen is fairly straightforward. It's most of the benefit comes from getting faster memory in there. We're working really hard on that. We want it to be as automatic as possible. We've got that next major BIOS update coming that'll get more sticks working at high speed, especially memory modules with Hynix chips, which appear to need a little help. If you're buying RAM, if you can find a stick with a type of chip called Samsung B-Die, beautiful. It works awesome on Ryzen. Those chips are fantastically good. Another interesting option, you can also change the number of CPU cores that are active. If you really want to push an aggressive overclock, for world records sort of reasons, you can turn off cores if you need to. We broke an 8-core world record with all 8 cores enabled, and some people have done the 6-core with 3+3, and there's another that broke a record with a 2-core having 1+1 mode. Okay, so what I've done is I've enabled Profile 2 automatically, so we're at DDR4 3200. I've also plugged in a 4 gigahertz clock speed. And I've also set the CPU core voltage to 1.4 volts. And this is hopefully overshooting what I'll need. I hope I can bring it back a little bit, and we'll see what happens. So you press F10 to save and reboot. Make sure that the options you set are as required. And hit it. And now we see what happens. I just finished assembling the system last night. I have not overclocked it yet, so I hope the silicon is good. 4 gig.
The one that you said you have in your office that's running the 4 gigahertz, you're running on the right cooler?
I actually have a Predator XLC 280 mil water cooler. Although the one, I have built another system running at 4 on the Wraith cooler as well. I don't have much software installed on this yet. But here we are at 4 gig. Now, if I were to stability testing. Two great ways to test a stability test. Prime 95 still is a magnificent test for testing CPU stability. And then a separate test called Lynx, L-I-N-X, is an awesome way to test memory stability. So you'll want to do maybe memory overclocking first, stability test that, and then CPU overclocking and stability test that. And those two tools can really get you there in terms of verifying stability. Your overclock will probably go through a couple phases of life. Phase one will be the I can't even boot to Windows mode. And that means you need a lot more core voltage or a lot more DRAM voltage. The next thing you might encounter is maybe when you stability test, your PC will reset. You're close. Not quite there yet, but you're close. A little bit more voltage will get you there. And then finally, Lynx or Prime 95 will just crash. And that's when you know you've almost got it dialed in. And a little more voltage or a little less clock speed, you choose, will finally stabilize your overclock. And that's the gist. Probably easiest just to do it with Ryzen Master because you can just keep booting back into Windows and playing with the voltages and the clock speeds. Those things you can do without rebooting the PC. You don't need to go into the BIOS. You can also set the memory through Ryzen Master. All of the things that I just did in the BIOS, I could do with that software tool.
With Ryzen Master, is those overclock settings, do they still disappear after you reboot Windows?
Nope. We have in that Agiza that I talked about
Right.
an interface that links the BIOS to Ryzen Master. So when you program those settings, they are applied at boot time.
Right, okay.
And then if they fail for whatever reason, the system will again automatically reset for you.